Hi, guys. Welcome to the third episode of Talk Crazy to Me. I'm your host, Tanya Mayato, and today my guest is Lauren Craddock. Hi, Lauren.
Hey, Ton.
How are you?
I'm good. How are you? Thanks for having me.
I'm so excited, honestly.
I am too, a little nervous, but...
That's okay. It's okay to be nervous, right? Like, this is what it's all about. But I'm so happy that we're doing this. So I always start off by saying how we know each other. So do you want to say how we know each other?
Sure. I am best friends with your sister for the last 28 years of my life, and then became friends with you because of it.
Yes, we did. I feel like I was the scary older sister for years. We find before we got close. I remember Tish always telling me that when her friends called the house, I would be like, I'd answer the phone and they'd think I was my mom. And they'd be like, your mom's so scary, but it was me. And then if it was my mom, they'd think it was my nice sister. So I don't know if you remember that, but I feel like I was
maybe
a
little bit. But I think we definitely started getting closer once you were living in Brampton and your sister was living with you.
Yeah.
And we had lots of fun times.
Honestly, so many fun times. Yeah.
Definitely, if there was any scariness, it was gone by that point.
Yeah, it's true.
So we had a lot of laughs.
No, we really did.
Yeah.
I fond memories of us laughing all the time and going out and dancing and the whole bit. So,
living life.
Okay, so my first question to you is, what makes you crazy?
I have thought about this, and I would say right now, if you were to ask me today, probably daycare.
Okay.
Because I am, my daughter is sick like every other week, and which means everyone in our family is sick constantly. So, so other than daycare, I would say probably just, the state of the world.
Yeah.
Globally, nationally, provincially. Yeah, pretty much everything makes me kind of crazy now.
Can you touch a little bit on any of those topics?
I mean...
in more detail?
Yeah, I just didn't want to get too political.
Yeah, you don't have to get too... You can go wherever you want to go.
Globally, I mean, there are so many different wars going on and people dying for zero reason other than greed and at the hands of pretty horrific people. So seeing that imagery every single day when we get to live in such a safe and, wealthy country feels quite awful.
Yeah.
I have a lot of feelings about our provincial government, given what I do for work, and federally as well. So I think my family is a very has always been very politically informed and socially informed, and it's just gotten worse as I've gotten older. And so I definitely have to try to take it in doses because it drives me insane. Yeah.
Well, I think a lot of people feel that way, and I think a lot of times they say to take even breaks from the news. And it's hard to take breaks from anything because we have our phones and things and everything's going all the time. So it's hard to take breaks. But I find that was one of the things that I learned very early on when I struggled with depression was they said to be careful about how much you're watching the news because it's so depressing at times, right? And although you want to stay informed and you want to know what's going on in the world, it also can deeply impact your mental health, right? So how much and how often you're taking it in, as much as you're a compassionate person and care about the world, you also have to take care of yourself, right? So at times, even taking those mental breaks, I think, are important. But it is hard to, shut it off in a sense.
Or even find a balance where you're not completely ignorant of what's happening to you around, like in your own community, in the world. But then also still realizing you can't completely deplete yourself when there's people in your life that depend on you. And, what I do for work, I have to go and people depend on me. So... definitely finding that balance, I think, can be quite tricky. And we live in a world where we can just consume, that finding that balance of where you shut it off and just kind of feed back into yourself can be kind of challenging.
Yeah, it can be. Yeah. So you touched upon a couple of times what you did for work. Do you want to talk about what you do so people know what you do?
So I'm a registered nurse. I've been a nurse almost 12 years now. I've worked pretty much most of it in the hospital. Most recently in the ICU. So I see a lot of illness, a lot of death, unfortunately, and I think a lot of people having the worst days of their lives.
Yeah.
So I love what I do. It's very rewarding, but it can also be incredibly can really deplete your soul and you feel very exhausted sometimes at the end of 12 hours of taking care of someone else, that it's hard to then come home and take care of yourself as well. So, yeah, I love what I do for work. But, yeah, I don't know.
Do you think that – because I agree. I think I'm a child and youth worker, so for me it was a lot of kids' energy of like what they were going through would kind of feed off of me sometimes, and then I would be depleted. And I always wondered one day how I would go home if I ever had my own children and have enough energy and mental capacity to kind of take care of them. So I find that it's an interesting thing to do something that is so kind, right, and does so much good and is rewarding, but can suck the life out of you literally sometimes.
Yeah. And
we live in this society where we have to sort of put on this facade sometimes in a sense that we're okay all the time for our patients, or for, like in your case for patients, in my case for clients, like to, you know what I mean, to make it seem like we're handling it all the time. But I think that, like, how do you feel like it impacts you to have that be a part of your life?
I think it's definitely a challenge. I think I started my career in pediatrics, so I took care of kids in the beginning.
Right.
Now that I have my own child, I'm really happy I don't work with children anymore, because I think it would have been much more difficult.
Yeah.
There's a part of my job where, you know, I care for pretty much mostly adults. There's some adolescents, but majority are adults.
Yep.
And there is a part of you that can kind of rationalize, you know, if someone is, you know, into their 80s and 90s, that they've had a really good life.
Yeah.
So if you can provide them comfort and, you know, emotional support in the end of it, it's not as soul-sucking,
Sure.
I would say.
Sure.
So then to come home and see my 2-year-old is like, it kind of like fills you back up because she's just so full of life at the beginning of her journey that it's not as tiring. But I think you do go through periods if you work in healthcare where you are just completely depleted.
Yeah.
And it's hard to take care of people at work, come home, take care of yourself and your family.
Yeah.
I think right now I'm in a really good place where it's not really getting to me. I did recently change where I worked, and I think that did help to a degree.
Okay.
But I think having a pulse on how you're doing mentally and how fulfilled and rewarded you feel in what you're doing, that if you're no longer feeling that way, then it's time to change.
Yes.
And I think I was definitely getting to that point. So where I am now, I've been there, I started in August, and it's a really great work culture. People are really supportive, and I think that has really helped in a field of work that can be quite emotionally exhausting.
Yeah. And I think touching upon the need for change is like such an important topic, because I think people are so afraid of it, and they almost get used to the shittiness because they're afraid to step outside of it. Like I did it for almost 10 years before I finally broke through and just said, you know, I'm going to try. And I slowly sort of trickled my way out. I kept on a supply list for a while just to kind of hold on to it. Yeah. But I realized holding on to it was actually worse off for me, because once I completely let it go, all these other opportunities just kept kind of flooding in. And I was like, wow, it's like letting go of something that's not serving you and trying to change and do something new can actually be so amazing, but people are afraid to do it, right? So I think saying that you had an experience of change and that it's doing you good is, and your body, your mind, everything starts to shift.
Yeah.
And you feel better. So I'm a big proponent in change. I think I posted something today about saying something like taking a change or something doesn't mean you failed, or it doesn't, you know, it's actually just taking you on a different place in life. And I think our parents' generation was a little bit more like stay in the same job.
Absolutely.
For your whole sort of career, and once you're in somewhere, you're in, and I had that mindset for a long time. Like once I was in the school board, I was in, and to not change it, but I was miserable. So I was like, what's the point of continuing to do this for the rest of my life? Yes, the benefits are good and the pension's good and all that kind of stuff, but if I wasn't happy doing it, life's too short, right? Yeah. Like change it. Try to find
because who knows
else.
If you're even going to make it long enough to enjoy a pension.
Yeah, exactly.
So, yeah, I completely agree. I think you get stuck when you have these benefits of like having benefits, having a pension, but ultimately you need to prioritize being happy.
Yes.
And I don't think everyone's happy in what they do all the time.
No, you can't be.
But I don't think you should ever be dreading where you're going to go for work or, bringing it home with you. And I think, change is very important in life. And I think that staying in one position for your whole career, I think it is quite rare now. You're completely right. Our parents did it, but now I think our parents raised us to really prioritize, making ourselves happy and more content and having these fulfilling lives. That I've changed. Like I've been a nurse, but I've done multiple things within my career other than just bedside. Yeah, and I'm glad I did because I really think change is, although it's uncomfortable, it's important for growth.
It is. It's where you grow. I was just thinking the exact same thing. If you stay in the same spot, in the same place, doing the same thing, you don't really grow and change and
learn about yourself.
And realize that breaking out of that comfort zone actually feeds your soul. Like you actually because you realize you're capable of much more than you give yourself credit for sometimes, because changing into something completely different or even adjacent, just something outside of that regular thing that you do, you realize you can do it. Yeah. And then you feel more accomplished and you feel it boosts your confidence. At least it did for me when I got out of what I was doing and tried to do something that aligned more with making me happy and feel good. And it was a game changer for me. So I love that you touched upon that because it's a big one. I think a lot of people are afraid of change.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
And I think you spend so many hours of your life working that, you should try to do something that you don't mind. Yeah. At least.
Makes you happy.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's funny when you said about your parents being stuck in the same job and doing the same thing, but they ultimately want, better for you. Yeah. It was funny because my dad didn't really... Like he had a hard time when I was leaving the school board.
Oh, really?
Because for him, it was because he was in the school board as a custodian and came from, very little education and, was orphaned by the time he was 16. Like for him, that was a dream job in a sense, right? Like
security.
It was security. It got us through everything. We had great benefits as kids and, so many things that they wouldn't have been able to afford. So like for him, he wanted that stability for me. And when I was sort of breaking free from that and getting into acting and getting into things that were a lot more scary and risky and, unstable in a sense, he was afraid, I think. And, before he passed, I had this conversation with him where he finally kind of said the words that he was proud of me for what I was doing, right? Because I really just felt like he wasn't, and he was just waiting for me to, go back to the school board and do whatever, that 9 to 5. And it was finally I had that conversation with him and he said it was my mom that told him that I was upset, thinking he wasn't proud. And he was like, "Don't get mad that your mom told me, but I am proud of you." And I just that's everything to me. Like I'll remember that for the rest of my life, that he's actually was behind me, in making such a big change. As much as it probably made him afraid, I really do feel like he's, sort of watching over me and carrying me through this journey that I've been on of just kind of doing what I want and not what I think other people thought I should be doing, including my parents. I had to sort of finally break free and do what made me happy, exactly what you said, like, because this is the only life we get, right? And if you're in work, like you said, especially in North America, where we put such a big emphasis on our work.
Too much.
Right? Too much. So, but why then not make sure it's something that makes you happy? And for sure, if I ever have kids, that's the biggest thing. I know I'm going to try to, feed their passions and what makes them feel good and what makes them happy, because it's just too much of your life to be miserable.
Yeah,
right?
Absolutely. I will say, like, my mom was a nurse, but she spent her entire career going back to school, getting further certifications and diplomas and all this education. And by the time she retired, she was a vice president. So, like, she didn't stay stagnant in her career. Right. And she retired in 2020. And, of course, how everything was in the world, it was over Zoom, her retirement party. And I remember just crying, thinking, like, how amazing it was to have watched this parent, this massive influence in my life, achieve so much despite raising 3 kids. And, like, and she, for me and my siblings, the 3 of us, she wanted so much more for us. And she would say to me, like, you should not feel comfortable with a degree. Yeah. You should want more than this. Yeah. And although that was, like, a bit anxiety-provoking when I was younger, now that I'm a parent, I get it, because you do want more for your kids. And I remember my mom telling me, please don't ever become a nurse. Yeah. Because she knows how hard it is to have a family and be a good nurse. Yeah. And you don't get paid as well as you should. The hours are quite terrible. You miss holidays. Like, there are definitely a lot of negatives to this occupation. And, but, I was 17 and I was like, no, I think I'm going to do nursing. And then there I was at 21 taking care of other people. There are lives in my hands. And I was like, well, maybe I should have listened to my mom. Right. But yeah.
But here you are now.
Yeah, I know. I wouldn't have done it any other way. I do like what I do for work, and healthcare has so many opportunities that even if, I decide I don't want to do bedside, there's so many other things I can do. But it's just funny that, my mom telling me, please don't do this.
Yeah. It's interesting because my parents were like, please do this. Yeah. And I did it and then wasn't happy. And your mom was like, please don't do this. Yeah. And then you did it. And you ultimately, it's still what you wanted to do and you're happy doing it. Yeah. So, our parents can be such an influence in some ways, and sometimes they're right and sometimes they're not. Yeah. So it's kind of like, you reach that point where you take it with a grain of salt and they're coming from a good place. Yeah. But you got to go with your gut and what you're feeling is best for you, right? So I think that's awesome.
100%.
Yeah, you got there. So talk to me about being a mom.
Yeah.
What's that like?
It's an entirely different experience. I knew my whole life I wanted to be a mom. It was something I wanted without any doubt. So, I spent probably a solid year before I actually conceived, working on my physical health, my mental health, because I wanted to be in my best form before I got pregnant, because I knew it was going to take a toll on me physically, mentally.
That's amazing. Yeah. I don't think I've ever heard someone say that, like to take that much time to think about it.
I'm not an impulsive person. Yeah. I probably overthink everything in my life. And so becoming a parent was something I knew years before, like, this is kind of where I see myself starting a family, how I want to do it. So, I was really blessed with a pretty healthy pregnancy. There's a few little scares here or there, but for the most part, it was great. And, I didn't know the gender of my child before she was born. And when she was born, they told me she was a girl. I actually had thought I was having a boy the whole time. Okay. And when they told me she was a girl, it was immediate panic of, holy shit, I have so much karma coming my way because of the daughter I was. And, it was really rough. It was, although I prepared so much for it, I don't actually think there's anything you can do to become a parent to really prepare yourself for what it will be like. My daughter was colicky for the first 3 months of her life. So she spent hours on hours crying.
Yeah.
And I remember we were in an apartment at the time just pacing back and forth, crying with her. Because I was like, and I know a lot of parents have felt this, but I was almost like, what have I done?
Right.
Like, maybe I was not actually ready for this.
Right.
Like, this, I'm way over my head.
Yeah.
I think you definitely lose yourself in parenthood, motherhood. And for me, it was just I thought I was going to be okay. Like, I've worked so many night shifts in my life.
Yep.
I can run off of very little sleep, but the sleep deprivation was horrific.
Yeah.
And it's just
it's emotionally draining too,
oh
right?
my
Like it's
gosh.
not just the physical; it's also your child, your baby, you know what I mean. So you're going through those emotions at the same time.
Yeah. And looking back now, I'm 2 years out from it, but I definitely had postpartum anxiety.
Yeah.
Like, she was born in the height of Omicron. I birthed her with a mask on, and she has a few little health issues that had she gotten sick, I would have been freaking out that something was going to happen to her.
Right.
So I think there was like this added element of becoming a parent during a pandemic that was a bit more challenging, where normally you would have all these people coming over and helping you in that. And like, I didn't really want people coming over.
Yeah.
And there's, I think, a sense of you're so vulnerable. You've never done this before. You're trying to figure out this little human that's so dependent on you that you almost, I'm very, I think, prideful, and I didn't want a lot of people seeing that side of me.
Sure.
Of, figuring out breastfeeding, figuring out she's crying, like, what does she need? It's all such a vulnerable time. So I think the first year of her life, although, like, you have these highs of just overwhelming happiness and feeling so grateful and so much love, but you've also never felt more lost in yourself. And I felt completely lost. But I think, like, kids have a way of kind of breaking you down to this really rare, raw form of yourself that you've never experienced. But then they build you up to this, like, in my opinion, better version of yourself.
Sure.
Like, now I'm like, what was life like before her?
Yeah.
Like, and of course, I think anyone would probably feel that after you have a child, because then it's like, at least if you were intending on becoming a parent, it's, it just changes everything. It changes your perspective, changes what you want. And, I think I used to bring work with me quite often, like things that happen in the day or that. Now I leave it at the door, and when I come home, I'm back in my personal life. Yeah. And, I think becoming a mom really shook me to my core. But this is the happiest I've ever been in my life, too.
Yeah. It's so funny. My mom always used to say that, because I was always so career focused. I still am, obviously, because I don't have any yet. But she was like, once you have them, it's just going to change how you feel even about your career. Like, you're not going to care about it as much. No. You're not going to, take it home with you, like you said. And you'll go home and they'll be there needing you. So you just, switch into that mode. Absolutely. So, that's what it reminded me of, that she used to always tell me that. Like, once you have them, you're not going to worry about that job as much. Or you still will worry about it. It'll still be a part of you. But it shifts how the priority of it, right? Absolutely. And that makes sense. That makes sense to me. She's so cute, though. Like, she's the cutest little thing. I haven't seen her since, I don't remember, was it summer, I feel like, last? So now she's so big and getting there.
She's a full-on 2-year-old now.
So you said it made you happier than you've ever felt.
Yeah.
Can you talk about, like, any kind of times where you felt like not so good, like where you've been down? Have you been to those places? Like, can you touch upon it a little bit, or how do you feel about talking about that?
Absolutely. Yeah. So I think part of why I prepared so much for becoming a mother is I was very worried about postpartum depression. I've had quite significant depression twice in my life before. Okay. The first time I was in fourth year university. Okay. And I had actually. How old were you? I would have been 20.
20, okay.
I had started on a birth control, and otherwise I was living my best life.
Yeah.
I was doing great in school. I was almost done university. I was in a loving relationship. My friendships were great. My family was great. And I started on this birth control, and then I started having this like impending feeling of doom that everyone in my life was going to eventually die. And how would I ever survive without these people?
Wow.
It was like this crushing feeling in my chest every day. It was like the strangest thing because the thought of eating anything except for either spaghetti or drinking Coca-Cola made me want to throw up.
Wow.
It was the most bizarre thing.
That is weird.
And the only thing I wanted to watch was The Office. I didn't want to watch anything else. Everything made me feel like I was going to be sick.
Wow.
So that went on for about a month. And but it was also over Christmas. So I figured, it's the holidays. I usually get a bit emotional over the holidays. Didn't think much of it.
Sure.
Then January came. I'm back at school. And Jassim, my partner, said to me, like, Lauren, this isn't normal. Like, something's going on. Like, I don't know what it is. Like, I think we need to go and talk to your mom. So I remember coming home and because Jassim was living in Mississauga at the time, I was in London, and saying to my mom how I felt and just completely breaking down that, like, I didn't really want to get out of bed.
Yeah.
I didn't really care if I woke up in the morning.
Yeah.
And I had never felt like that before in my life. So thankfully, I went and saw my family doctor. She was incredibly supportive, and immediately she made the connection. It's since you started this birth control a month and a half ago, this all happened.
Right.
But because I was in such a low place, I started on an antidepressant. I went and saw a counselor. And I was very lucky that it was just really situational, you know.
Right.
Once I came off that birth control, it was okay again.
Yeah.
But, I think throughout my 20s, I spent a lot of time, I partied a lot. I lived my life. I lived very selfishly. But then on in towards probably my later 20s, I kept having this feeling of I need to be doing something different with my life. I need to, I should be in a different place in my life,
Right.
I think you start seeing your friends get married and get master's degrees and, you're doing so much self-reflection.
Yeah.
And I think with social media, you're constantly comparing yourself to other people. It was a rough time in my life. And then I was like, let me try my hand in management.
Sure.
So I went into management. I left patient care. And then a global pandemic hit, working in healthcare. And it was a really stressful time. None of us knew what was happening. We knew nothing about this virus. We knew, where the world was going. And, after a while, I noticed I had this moment. I was at a friend's bachelorette party, and I was laying on the dock. We had just done yoga on a dock. And I was laying there thinking, I'm not happy. I have let myself be so unhappy for so long. I don't have to feel like this. And it was the first moment, because I was constantly on call in this job. It was the first moment where I felt like I could breathe, and I didn't even realize I hadn't been breathing.
Wow.
So a few weeks later, I went out with some friends for drinks. And I think, it was 2020. It was a weird time. Patios had just kind of reopened. And I went home, and from that night, I started having chest pain. Wow. And I had same kind of impending feeling of doom, like something bad's going to happen. Like, I was reflecting everything on my life, the past decade of my life, decade and a half even.
Right.
Going back into my childhood, thinking about all these things that had happened in my life that I never actually processed, traumas that had happened, really unfortunate situations that I never really processed, I never dealt with, I never sought therapy for, nothing. And it all just came to a head.
Absolutely.
So for a solid week, I was definitely having a panic attack. I couldn't sleep. I couldn't eat. I honest to God thought I was having a heart attack. Yeah. And in my educated brain, I knew I wasn't.
Right.
But I felt like I couldn't breathe.
Right.
So I actually ended up leaving work in the middle of the day. I went to my manager sobbing, telling her I think I'm having a heart attack.
Wow.
Left, went to the emergency department, and I, told them what had been going on, and the nurse and the physician that saw me were like, do you know how many people in healthcare that have come in with this exact same thing in the last, forever, but especially within that last year.
Yeah.
So I actually ended up going on medication again. Mm-hmm. That first time I had only been on it for maybe less than a year. Mm-hmm. But I needed something. I was not coping. I didn't feel alive. It was the same feeling. I did not care if I woke up. Mm-hmm. I didn't care what tomorrow held. It was a very low point in my life. And I will say medication saved my life. Yeah. I'm very thankful for it. Yeah. And, I was off of work for 2 months after that. Mm-hmm. And that's when I realized, you know what, I need to go back to patient care. Yeah. I think I need a job where I'm not bringing it home. I'm not getting called at home, checking my email. Yeah. I'm there for, 12 hours. I leave and I'm back in my own life. Mm-hmm. And having those 2 months to really just focus on myself and becoming healthy again was transformative. I also had just turned 30 and I just felt like it was such a pivotal time in kind of reimagining my life and what I wanted and kind of refocusing on what do I want the next few years of my life to look like. And I think medication doesn't work for everyone, but in those 2 instances in my life, I can say without a doubt it saved my life. Yeah. I don't know where I would have been without it because I'm very fortunate too. Both of those medications worked really well for me. Right. I only needed to be on them for a short period of time. Right. Because both were very situational. Sure. But and then that's when I basically realized, okay, I need to really make myself my healthiest form physically and mentally if I want to become a parent. And that's kind of brought me up to where I am now.
It's an amazing story. Thank you so much for sharing all of that because it's, I think it's going to help so many people, especially someone in the healthcare system talking about going through it and what that feels like. I know for me, you were the first person that said something that triggered for me about depression and the not being able to eat part, like that physically feeling ill trying to eat. Because I remember the first time experiencing depression, and I love food. Like, I love food, right? So I remember just feeling like I physically couldn't eat and putting the food in my mouth, I wanted to, like, puke. Yeah. And I just didn't know what the hell was happening to me. Like, I didn't know how. Situationally, too, I was going through a lot. My parents were separated, and I was going through some stuff, and I was in university at the time, too. I think I was 19 when they broke up and 21 when they got back together. But it was when they got back together that I actually started to go through it for that first time because I was so afraid of what was going to happen when they got back together. If everything was going to screw up or something and I kind of had put my parents back together. So I had taken a lot of that responsibility that if it didn't work out, everyone was going to blame me and hate me. So I had
How old were you?
I was 21.
Oh my God.
I was 21 and they had been separated for 2 years. And, I watched both my parents go into severe depression, breaking up. You know how like some people when they break up, it's like a huge weight off their shoulder. They're happier. Everything's beautiful. No, my parents got worse. And seeing them both like that, me and Tish were the only ones talking to both of them. So we knew, but Tish was so young. Yeah. I put them back together, but I was so afraid of what was going to happen if it didn't work out because they kind of started moving quickly, getting back together really quickly, and then I was scared. And I just remember I couldn't eat. I couldn't sleep. Food was making me feel so nauseous. That was my first experience with it. But I didn't go on medication at that point. I probably should have, but I kind of bounced out of it quickly. And then I think same thing, stuffing shit down over and over. The traumas that you'd been through, things that I had been through. I had been in an abusive relationship and had gotten out of it, but I stuffed down what had happened to me and just thought moving on will fix everything. Right. And it doesn't. So you stuff it and stuff it and stuff it. And like you said, the more you stuff it down, the more it's going to explode at some point and the bigger the explosion is going to be. So Absolutely. I think talking about how much we stuff inside of us. It's like shaking a bottle of Coke or pop or whatever and then letting the top off and it just like explodes. That's what it feels like when you keep stuffing it down. So I love that you talked about that too, because I can definitely relate to what it feels like to not deal with that trauma and things that have happened to you in your past that you're like, I've gotten through it. Here I am standing strong because of it. But if you don't deal with it in therapy or anything like that, it's going to keep popping up. Somehow, some shape, some form. And sometimes it's little and sometimes it's massive.
Yeah.
And then, for me, it was like more of I call it more of a breakthrough than a breakdown because it felt like a breakdown. But what came out of it was finally sort of getting on a medication that was helping me and then going from there. So it's just, I can totally relate to medication is, you're right, not for everyone. You can go on the wrong ones. I was put on the wrong ones, and that's a whole other ballgame of what happened to me when that happened. But I think when you finally find something that works for you, even if it is just a period of time, if it saves you, it saves you. And if
it's better to be on the planet than not.
Exactly. And having those dark thoughts of, like you said, not caring if you made it to the next day.
Yeah.
I think it's very scary to have those thoughts and to be in those places of not wanting to get out of bed and all those kind of things. But once you get through those bouts of depression, I always feel like you are much more equipped to deal with it the next time when it comes up.
Absolutely.
And the warning
recognize
signs.
it.
Yeah, the warning signs. You can recognize it. You're aware of it. You know sort of what you can do to help yourself. And it prepares you in a way that, you almost wish you never went through it to prepare yourself. Yeah. But it does prepare you in a way that I think when you recognize someone else that's never gone through depression, you can also help them as well, right? Like you can see the warning signs in other people too. So I think it does shift you and change you, but I think once you recognize it again and see it again, you'll know from that point on how to help yourself.
100%.
And the things that you need to do to get out of it so that it doesn't sort of last too long. Because that's when it gets scary, when it's day after day after day after day and you don't know when it's going to end. Yeah. And that's always the scary thing with depression, I think, is that, even though you've been through it before, you're kind of like, how long is this going to last this time, and not really know how long. So you have to do whatever you can in those moments, I think, to get yourself out of the darkness. And going through it, is helpful. Like I feel like even with my mom, my mom, happiest, head in the clouds, loveliest, woman. Yep. But I would get frustrated a lot that she didn't understand what like depression sort of felt like, was like whatever, because she just was always so happy. Yeah. But, seeing her now kind of go through some stuff is hard, but I think how to help her more because I know what it's like to go through it and can recognize it and just say, Mom, you're depressed sometimes and that's okay. And how do we get through it? And what can we do to help? But I think it's heartbreaking to see your parent go through something like that. But I think knowing to be able to relate and say, like, listen, now you kind of remember what it was like when I was going through it and now you're going through it and we can help each other. So it's just, it makes you a stronger person and it makes you a more compassionate person. And I think it ultimately helps you help others too, which I think is sort of the silver lining of it.
Absolutely. I think I'm thankful I've gone through all of that because I think had I not gone through that severe depression in and around when I turned 30 and needing to be off of work for 2 months, I don't know what would have pulled me out of being so unhappy. Yeah. So I'm really thankful for it because, since then, this is the healthiest, happiest I've ever been. Right. So, sometimes I think it's awful, but it takes being so low to reach such highs. Yeah. And I think taking the leave is also a really important thing that you talked about because I did the same thing. I took a leave and that's when I took that time to reflect, understand, and know that I wasn't in something that was serving me. And that's how I knew
that it was time to move on. So for me, taking those, because there's such a stigma with taking a leave.
Oh my
right?
gosh, yeah.
So I think even talking about that and saying, saying that out loud, that, I took some time to for myself and for my mental health and to figure things out, because again, you're not going to be there to be able to do the job anyways if you're not well enough. So you have to know when it's time to take a break too.
Yeah.
So I think that's important. You talked about so many important things that really I think will help a lot of people. So I love that.
Well, I'm happy to be here. Thank you for this.
Yeah. No, thank you for this. Is there anything else that you think that you thought that you wanted to touch upon in this sort of reflecting before we were going to do this, or how do you feel?
I think the only other thing is, and I am curious to know what you think. I have tried therapy a few times in my life.
Yeah.
I personally never really found it helpful. I didn't enjoy bringing up things that I had gone through previously, experiences that I had that I think were probably a bit traumatizing.
Sure.
And I think I've tried it maybe 3 separate times. And I know everyone says you have to find the right therapist.
Yeah.
And maybe I just didn't care to keep talking about it with people. So I wish I found it more helpful, but I never really did. Did you ever find...
It did. I know it is cliche to say to find the right one, but it did take me many tries to find the right one. So I went through periods of time where I was like, again, because I think I come from the mental health field, I can read them really well.
Right.
So I know when they're full of shit and when they're super judgmental, even though they're pretending that they're not. So for me, it was like I'd have to feel them out first and like test them with some stuff just to see how they would respond for me to know if they were really judging me or not. Because I think that's a big piece is like everyone's like, oh, we're so non-judgmental. Are you? Or are you kind of judging me? And I had a couple times where things were said to me where I'm like, that rubbed me the wrong way. But I will say I finally saw a psychotherapist and that was different to me, and I realized again she connected to me. I resonated a lot with. She had a little blurb, like all the therapists had little blurbs about who they were and what they were about, and I read hers, and it just spoke to me. Just the way she spoke. Her writing was really well as well. That's also a thing for me. And when I connected with her, it was just instant. It was instant, and I opened up about things that I had been hesitant to open up about with previous therapists. And but I will also say I was also ready for it then.
Okay.
In other ways, in other times of my life, it was crisis mode. And so although I needed it, I don't know if I was ready to like receive what they were saying.
Right.
If that makes sense.
Yeah.
So I think it also is timing. And so finding the right therapist, but also timing in your life. And I think not doing it when you're in crisis mode also helps, because then you can kind of get into the nitty-gritty without it being so triggering, if that makes sense. Yeah. So I think while you're in a really happy place is a great time to still do it and find that therapist, and then you're in a better headspace to talk about those things.
Right.
And then I think that's when, for me, it really started to work, when I was in a really good place to receive it.
Okay.
And then find the right person, too, because some of them suck.
Yeah.
Straight up.
Yeah.
But yeah.
I guess not everyone's going to mesh well together.
No, and I think it's also important to be aware when it's not working, and it's okay to move on from them. Because like anything else, if it's not working and, then there's someone else better suited out there. And don't waste your time with someone that you don't feel you're clicking with, which I did as well. I was like, I'm going to try. And I get caught up in like, I don't want to start over. I'm already starting this. But I think, again, like with the same thing with change and with whatever, if there's something sitting with you that's not working with them, then they're probably just not the right person for you. And then trying someone different, I think, is helpful. But I also think it has to do with the timing of yourself and when you're in the right place to work through some of that stuff. Because I think you think you're ready, and then you're not always ready.
Yeah. Especially, you're right. If you're in crisis,
Yeah.
the last thing you want to do is bring up all the stuff from your
Right.
past that you've suppressed.
Yeah.
And managed up until that point.
Right. And I remember in the beginning when I first did therapy, I cried every time. Like every time I would bawl, like something would come out and I would bawl. And she was very, good in a sense of handling that moment. But I didn't feel like after doing it for a period of time that I really got a lot out of it because I was just so messed up at the time. Like, I probably did get a piece of it. Like, it was probably keeping me going in a sense. But I didn't get into the nitty-gritty of everything. It was sort of just dealing with that situational, what was going on at that moment.
Right.
I wasn't ready to go into the trauma that, now I think I've kind of really been able to delve into it when I was at the right time and ready for it. So I think it's all relative, right? Like I'm sure it did help you in some ways. But maybe not this sort of big revelation that you were feeling you were going to get out of it.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's timing. I would try it again. Never give up on it because I'm a big believer. It still does help.
So many people are. So I think it's just finding the right person.
Yeah, it's finding the right person. Yeah.
And being in the right headspace. You're right.
Yeah. But anyways, I think this is perfect.
Thank you.
I'm ready to wrap this up. Are you okay with that?
Yeah,
Okay, cool.
absolutely.
Well, thank you so much for doing this again.
Thank you for having me.
And really, honestly, you are so dear to my heart because I really feel like I've watched you grow, as like a, big surrogate sister. So it's just so nice to see, your family growing and the person you've become and that you're in such a good place right now. I love that.
Thank you,
I love sharing that. No, I really do. I love it. From the bottom of my heart, it warms me to hear all that. So that's a wrap on episode 3. Thank you, Lauren, for coming, and thank you all for watching. Please, if you feel compelled to tell your story, get in contact with me somehow, and let's do this because it's just going to keep going, and I'm so proud of everything and everyone that's been on it so far, and I'm just excited to see where it will go. Bye, guys.